What's up, team of beautiful savages? How are you today? Today I'm gonna react to how will USA react if Russia will attack Finland. Let's check it out. I'm from Latvia. For people who don't know, this is the border with Russia, Lithuania, Estonia. We're like between the Kaliningrad, Russia's part of Europe, and the mainland Russia, right? So we are a bit in heat over here. So it's a bit crazy when it comes down to information here in Latvia, right? Because there's a lot of information war happening and people are divided because of that, you know. Some people take the Russian side, some people take the Latvian side, some people take Ukrainian side. This is crazy, guys. This war brings nothing good to nobody except even to the Putin. I'm not sure if this war brings any good.
Missiles rain from the sky over Helsinki. There's no snow in Finland's capital today, only ash. The white cathedral that has stood proudly at the head of Senate Square for almost 200 years is crumbling. Smoke blackens its white stone. But it's not destroyed yet. And at this very moment, 30 meters below the ground, a primary school full of children is playing in a ball pit. The bunkers stretching beneath the Finnish capital house over 1 million people. There they have...
Wow, that's impressive. It's here in Riga we have like undergrounds, a lot of undergrounds. I think they should like start thinking like something about that, you know, like where to hide from rockets.
Living quarters, sports facilities and hospitals. An entire society does its best to go on living, holding on to hope that the solid granite above their heads will be enough to keep them safe for another night. On Sundays they hold church services where the people pray for peace, as in the air above them, F-35s with both Finnish and American pilots roar on by in the direction of the Russian border. There are few countries in the world more prepared for war than Finland. Having gained their independence from Russia in 1917, the Finnish people have fought fiercely to hold on to it ever since. Under the cover of the chaos of World War II, Russia saw the chance to reclaim the country for themselves. Finland holds a key advantage in the north of Europe, which...
Yeah, and the thing is, like, Finland would win the war if they would have some allies, in my opinion, during the Soviet occupation, Soviet attack, because the first attack they were able to deflect, but when the second attack came, then like there was this thing that there was not enough people, not enough ammo, you know, so nobody was coming to help them. So yeah,
Russia was sorely missing. Taking the smaller country would give them much better access to the Baltic Sea, allowing their navy to attack much of mainland Europe uncontested. But the Russians really misjudged their neighbor. While they did eventually win on paper, hardly anyone would see the conflict that played out as a success for Russia. For every Finnish casualty, they took 10 Russians with them. The war was long, spread across 2 conflicts called the Winter War.
Also, guys, I have a crazy story about a Finnish soldier. You can check it out over here. I won't spoil it, but it's worth to listen, guys.
And the continuation war lasting over 4 years. And it badly exposed Russia's lack of preparedness and training, as well as Finland's fierce drive for independence and impressive military cunning. One of Finland's greatest assets was what drives a lot of fair-weather tourists away from the country today: the cold. Minus 40-degree temperatures stepped in to defend Finland as the country plunged into icy conditions harsh enough to send anyone home in fear. But for the Finnish men who had spent their whole lives enduring and acclimatizing to life in the extreme cold, this was just normal weather. They had spent all their lives hunting animals in the snow, so a few slow-moving Russian soldiers weren't that much different. Finnish soldiers would whip through the snow forests.
There's a story about this Finnish sniper who killed a lot of Soviets, right? And he was so good. I don't know his name, but like I bet there was a lot of snipers back then from Finland, because they were good hunters also.
On skis, conducting hit-and-run attacks and ambushing the narrow roads, blowing up bogged-down vehicles and leaving traffic jams for miles behind. Just a couple of soldiers would hold up the Russian invasion on that front for days or even weeks.
Man, that's
individual
impressive.
Snipers would set up on strategic points and steadily pick off platoons of Russian soldiers one by one. The most lethal sniper in world history, Simo Häyhä, fought for Finland in this war, tallying up over 500 kills on his own, according
Oh my gosh, 500 kills!
to some sources. And this was a war that had caught Finland relatively unprepared. Since the end of World War II, Finland has spent the better part of 80 years arming themselves and designing the entire infrastructure of the country for the eventuality that Russia will invade again. Take the bunkers, for example. It's a law in Finland that when designing any building larger than 1,200 square meters, they must include a bunker in the design. The metro system was built with the dual purpose of also housing people in the event of an emergency. Visiting Helsinki and other major cities today, you'll find sports halls, play areas, and swimming pools in regular use, all buried deep underground. In large storerooms lining the edges of these facilities are food and medical supplies. At the drop of a hat, the majority of the population of Finland can move underground, fortified by thick steel blast doors designed to withstand nuclear blasts. A recent survey found that Finland has roughly 50,500 of these bunkers, capable of holding a total of 4.8 million people, holding a total of 4.8 million of Finland's 5.5 million population at any one time. Down there they have clean running water, the cleanest tap water in the world, by the way, and enough supplies and facilities to continue living for months on end. Above ground, it's a similar story. The infrastructure of the country has been designed with war in mind. One of the things that snared the Russians so badly in World War II was the country's terrain. Finland is almost entirely dense forest land. When it isn't a dense forest, it's a lake. Looking down at Finland from a plane as you come into land at any of its major airports, you'll see trees and lakes all the way to the horizon. Moving a large body of soldiers through it is
That's a lot of lakes, I can tell you that.
therefore very difficult. You need roads and bridges. The Finnish people have used this to their advantage, designating an unknown number of bridges as ones to be destroyed in the event of a war. Any Russian tanks moving across the border would need roads and bridges to get around. Destroying and blocking key access routes would allow the Finns to funnel Russian troops into choke points littered with landmines and surrounded by Finnish soldiers trained in the art of ambush. But every war ultimately comes down to the warriors themselves. How does Finland ensure that it has enough ready hands to turn strategy into action? The Finnish military strategy relies heavily on its mandatory conscription system, meaning that every male over the age of 18 will receive a letter calling them up to complete a minimum of 6 months military training. Almost every man in Finland has experience using a rifle, digging a foxhole, planting landmines, firing RPG.
Listen, that's very good thing. I would like to that this thing would happen here in Latvia also, because it's very efficient to have this skill. Because in the case of like a war, this is like what you want to know, how to use the gun, you know, how to hide, how to move. So yeah.
And the nation has a long list of reserve soldiers already earmarked for individual roles in specific platoons and battalions should the war break out. At a moment's notice, this small country can mobilize an army large enough and well trained enough to stand toe-to-toe with almost any invader. At least they can at first. This is where the fundamental flaw comes in, and it's a flaw that won Russia the fight during the Second World War, and possibly the flaw that could see them eventually overwhelm Ukraine. Numbers. Russia, simply put, is an enormous nation. Finland's population is 5.5 million, while Russia's is 142 million. That's around 26 times the size of Finland's. No matter how much of a fight Finland puts up, Russia will inevitably have more soldiers to throw at the problem. There's only so long that Finland will be able to hold out against invasion under their own strength, but fortunately, they don't have to. As of 2023, Finland is one of the newest members of NATO. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization was formed in the shadow of World War II to protect Europe from ever plunging into war again. A small band of countries agreed that should one of them be invaded, the others would all come to their aid. Over the second half of the 20th century, this group grew larger and larger, and with the fall of the Soviet Union, it exploded in popularity, with many of Russia's former pawns switching allegiance in order to be guaranteed protection and independence by the bigger and stronger nations. And there is no nation.
I think that was a wise move by the small countries, because literally in the history there was so many times that like Latvia was taken over because there was nobody to come to save us, right? Well, in turning, like Soviet Union took us over. Before Soviet Union, we were part of Russian Empire, right? Like And then when like revolution happened, we got our independence. And after that, Soviets took Latvia, like occupied Latvia.
In NATO bigger and stronger than the United States of America, but their pact with Finland goes beyond that. On December 18, 2023, Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, met with Antti Häkkänen and Elina Valtonen, the Finnish Ministers of Defense and Foreign Affairs respectively, to sign a defense cooperation agreement in Washington, D.C. Despite Finland officially joining NATO 8 months earlier, the US was keen to create a direct agreement with Finland on top of their NATO alliance to strengthen the two nations' bond even further. This DCA was put in place to regulate the presence of US armed forces and the activities of US suppliers on Finnish soil. It means that the US will have access to 15 military bases in Finland where they will be able to station their own troops. This will act as a major deterrent to Russia. If they invade Finland and kill US soldiers in the process, then that will constitute an act of war, not just on 5.5 million Finns, but also 333 million Americans. And trust us, those Americans
Also all other NATO members
have a lot of guns. Since 1982, no US president had visited Finland for the sake of visiting Finland. Bill Clinton and Donald Trump both visited during their presidencies, but for the express purposes of holding meetings with Russian leaders Boris Yeltsin and Vladimir Putin. Yet in 2023, Joe Biden made the express point of visiting Finland to meet with Sauli Niinisto, the Finnish president at
The Finnish president looks like Emperor from Star Wars, just a bit.
time, and other Nordic prime ministers. The US is keen to show very publicly how much they support Finland. So what are they doing behind the scenes to help bolster Finnish defences? For years, the Finnish Air Force has relied on a modest fleet of McDonnell Douglas FA-18 Hornet jets to defend their skies. Like all military vehicles, these have a shelf life and are due to be retired by 2030. In their place, Finland has been putting in orders for a fresh batch of the US's crown jewel of aerial combat, the F-35. These should start arriving in 2026, initially starting off their service period in the frozen north in Lapland, where much of Finland's key air bases are housed. These jets won't just be delivered to Finland, however. They are set to be built there in a new facility, all bundled into a multi-stage $9.6 billion deal between Finland and Lockheed Martin. Before signing off on the deal, the Finns needed to check that the F-35s would be able to function properly in the Arctic conditions. They ran extensive flight tests, including landing the jet on stretches of highways, to make sure that they could cope with the extreme conditions and prolonged periods of darkness in the winter months. The jet is equipped with an infrared 360-degree view, where the pilot's helmet can allow them to literally look through the floor at what's below them with total night vision clarity.
Wow, man, this is interesting. Listen, this is next level technology.
The fact that the jet succeeded was a huge coup for the nation. The F-35 is the most advanced jet in the world, a true all-rounder capable of dogfighting with the best of the best, as well as performing ground operations. It's coated with radar-absorbing paint, which makes it virtually undetectable to radar and can fly at over 1,200 miles per hour. It feels like it's anywhere and everywhere at once. Incredibly difficult to fight against, and with the most advanced targeting systems in the world, it's deadly accurate when it does suddenly appear. A fleet of 64 of these is nothing to sniff at, but when compared to Russia's fleet of 809 fighters with an estimated 526 in active deployment, we see again the inherent disadvantage that Finland faces. Another key piece of equipment that Finland has been ordering in bulk is the 66 KES. That's the Finnish name for it, though soldiers often just refer to it as the Kesi. For the rest of the world, it's called the M72 LAW. LAW stands for Light Anti-Armor Weapon. It's a tank buster. A small portable single-use rocket launcher designed to pierce enemy armor and leave it stuck in the mud.
Back in the day, there was these Germans had during World War II. They had Panzerfaust. I think there was this like little thingy like that you put in like a small grenade, and he just a grenade launcher, like small grenade launcher. And you can literally give it to anybody, and this guy can take out a tank.
Every soldier trained in the Finnish army is taught in detail how to fire one of these. The key advantage of the Kesi is that it's incredibly lightweight and reliable. A lone Finnish soldier can carry one slung over their shoulder no problem for long distances. Since it's so light, Finnish soldiers can sneak up close to the Russian vehicles. At a moment's notice, it can be primed and readied. Then they just have to pop out of cover for a split second, pull the trigger, and then they can be running away before the projectile has even hit its target, discarding the used device behind. It's estimated that the Finnish Defence Forces already own about 70,000 Kessis, and in 2022 they put in an order for more. In a woodland war against Russia, where choke points and ambushes will dictate much of the action, the small and cheap Kessis will punch well above their weight, immobilizing or even destroying millions of dollars worth of Russian tanks in a split second. If they miss or fail to do enough damage, it doesn't matter. The Finns have 70,000 of them, so another shot will be flying in at any moment. Add on top of that Finland's rapidly growing stockpile of British NLAWs, and life as a Russian tank driver is not looking particularly fun. So that's some of how the US has helped equip Finland, but why this tiny nation particularly? Why is Finland getting preferential treatment over other nations that might be higher on Putin's hit list? Both Finland and the US have always enjoyed positive relations with each other, but in the last few years, there is more urgency to proceedings. It seems clear that Putin does not intend to stop at just invading Ukraine. Other European nations are at risk of Russian invasion, but no one is quite sure where it could be yet. The Baltics, Poland, Moldova, Georgia, and Kazakhstan are all at risk as they fall outside of NATO membership. Where Russia will attack next is anyone's guess, but if Russia does decide to invade a NATO member, then Finland will be near the top of their list. The Arctic Circle is an evolving battlefield. Years ago, the polar region was virtually off-limits. It was inhospitable for ground forces. Naval vessels would be trapped by shifting bodies of ice, and aircraft would struggle to operate in the harsh conditions and travel the long ranges needed for military strikes. The effort was not worth it. But with climate change taking hold, new shipping routes are opening up through the Arctic ice. Military technology has advanced to the point that a lot of the barriers to Arctic weather that once existed can now be overcome. Russia is no longer relying solely on the Baltic Sea to get a foothold in attacking Europe from the north. Now Putin will have the option of launching attacks across the Arctic at both Europe and America. Couple this with vast...
Yeah, well, I don't know about that. I'm not sure. I have a theory that a lot of YouTubers are trying to escalate the situation with the Russia attacking Europe. It might happen, but it might not happen, you know. So you never know really. And but many people, you know, they are trying to make you think about it, hype on that, and watch the videos about that. So, you know, I wouldn't be ready, be prepared for the war, but just don't overreact, you know, by watching and listen to other people's opinions.
Untapped reserves of oil and natural gas, both key strategic resources in a war, and the polar region has really come into play as a potential battleground. In the last few years, we've seen Putin testing hypersonic missiles capable of evading American defenses in the Arctic. In August 2023, the US discovered a secretive Russian-Chinese military flotilla patrolling the waters near Alaska. It's believed that the Russians now have over 30% more military bases in the Arctic than both the US and NATO combined. Some experts have estimated that NATO is around 10 years behind the Russians in the region. Finland's proximity to the Arctic and the border with Russia means that, geographically speaking, they are the first line of defense in a polar war. The US will be relying on Finland, Sweden, and Norway for valuable intelligence, patrols, and potentially as military bases in the event of war. Should the Arctic remain uncontested, then Russia has a direct route to attack the United States. Even more worryingly for the West, foreign intelligence believes that one of Russia's key nuclear stockpiles is housed up near the Arctic Circle, close to the border with Finland. If Russia invades Finland, then NATO's Article 5 will be invoked, and it will be treated as a direct attack on all members. All of a sudden, the world will have nuclear superpowers in the US, Russia, France, and UK all at war. The threat of nuclear escalation will hang over the conflict from day one. It will be in NATO's best interests to not only defend the Finnish border, but use the country as a launch point to sabotage Russia's nuclear stockpile in the north. This would be a risky strategy, as it would leave Putin in a use-it-or-lose-it situation where he would either have to concede losing a large portion of his nuclear stockpile or launch them right away. Who knows how the paranoid aggressor will act in that situation? What is clear is that with Finland's membership of NATO going through, the playing field has fundamentally changed, even compared to how it was a year or two prior.
Yeah, listen. When Russia started the war with Ukraine, NATO, Sweden and Finland joined NATO straight away, and the other countries start weaponizing straight away, start spending money for the defense. Like literally, let's just take Latvia. Literally, before the war in Ukraine, in Latvia, there was no mandatory service. There was no like a lot of money. Not a lot of money was spent to defense, right? But now they are putting a lot of money into defense. They're bringing in mandatory service after 18 years. So, like Russian president says that. Like NATO was the aggressor, but looks like no, because before the war started, it was more chilled out, much more chilled out.
Before this, if Russia were to invade Finland, the country would receive the kind of support that Ukraine is getting now. Large injections of cash, advanced military equipment shipped to their door, humanitarian aid, military training, intelligence support, but no actual troops on the ground. They would have been fighting the war on their own. But now Finland is part of a much larger body. They have the backing of 31 other member states, all of whom have a written obligation to protect Finland. A Russian invasion of Finland today will mark day one of a Third World War, one in which Finland will be a vital battleground. For years, the US has been sending troops to Finland to train alongside their soldiers in joint exercises. Now those exercises are a reality. US troops will be deployed to Finland right away, interspersed with the Finns, to provide Finland the parity in numbers that they have always been sorely lacking against Russia. The objectives of the war will be to play to the Finnish strengths, which would remain the same: fierce defense. Using the natural landscape, the strategic infrastructure, the choke points and ambush tactics, the joint Finnish-US NATO forces would hold the country as well as they could. The difficulty is that the border with Russia is enormous. It runs all the way from the bottom of Finland up to the top in the Arctic Circle, 1,340 kilometers in total. Even with those combined forces, that's a large body of land to defend. Therefore, the Finnish strategy from World War II of sending out fast mobile soldiers on skis to do tactical strikes would be adapted for the modern age. Instead of men on skis, this would now look like F-35s racing across the border into Russian territory to carry out targeted bombing runs, taking out key resource stockpiles, military bases, and key infrastructure like railways and roads. As the Russians would try to work...
Yeah, this is another problem having, being at war with a country that has developed weapons, developed air force, and they can... run raids into your territory. This is big pain in the ass.
Their way across the border into Finland, they would get bogged down in the woods and find that they were being cut off from behind, losing access to reinforcements and vital supplies. Meanwhile, the Finnish people would be hunkering down in bunkers to prevent the same tactics being used against them. Meanwhile, the US and NATO, including Sweden and Norway, would be conducting operations across the Arctic Circle, looking to take out Russia's nuclear submarines that are believed to be operating in the region, as well as eliminating their naval presence. Finland does not have a large navy at all, just 4 small attack vessels, all of which operate off the south coast of the country in the Baltic Sea, so they'll be relying on their foreign allies in this instance to protect them in the north. Thankfully, a threat of invasion from Russia in the northern half of the country is not so likely. This part of Finland is even more sparsely populated than the south, meaning almost all of it is dense forest. Moving through the region would be slow. In summer, the Russians would have to contend with the lakes getting in their way. In winter, these would freeze over, but not enough to support the weight of a tank, and soldiers would then have to deal with the extreme winter temperatures. As we mentioned earlier, Lapland is home to much of the Finnish Air Force as well, so while there will be fewer troops on the ground, there would be regular aerial patrols that would very quickly spot a large body of warm soldiers or vehicles moving through the area. From that point, the Russians would be sitting ducks for bombing runs. The final strategic advantage that Finland has, and one of the reasons that Russia invaded in World War II at all, is the nation's proximity to Russia's major cities. Vladimir Putin does not like having NATO allies close to his cities at all. He invaded Ukraine to prevent the country from joining the EU and NATO, as it would pose a strategic disadvantage to him to have enemy troops housed so close to his precious home. Finland's capital Helsinki is just 300 kilometers by air from St. Petersburg in Russia. This is one of Russia's oldest cities and its second largest behind Moscow. For 200 years, it was the imperial city, and to this day, it's still the center of Russian culture and history over the country's capital. From Finland, it would not take NATO forces long at all to push into Russia and lay the city under siege or take it entirely, striking a huge symbolic blow to Putin's vision for Russian supremacy. For a man so obsessed with borders, land, and restoring Russian glory, the loss of St. Petersburg would be an utter catastrophe. So from Finland, the US and NATO would be able to strike at Putin's nuclear stockpile, work at negating his advantage in the Arctic Circle, and launch an attack on his second most precious city. The US's involvement in a war in Finland would go beyond simply defending Finland's sovereignty and trying to do as much damage as possible before conceding defeat like in the Second World War. It would quickly become the most important battleground in the north and a potential disaster point for Vladimir Putin. Right now, Finland's position against Russia on the world stage is looking stronger than it ever has. They have the US and NATO rallying around them in support, are actively bolstering their military equipment year on year, and deepening their relationship with the US more and more. And it's all Putin's fault, as if he hadn't invaded.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. If he wouldn't invade the Ukraine, everything would be chilled.
Ukraine, the domino chain leading to Finland joining NATO wouldn't have been triggered. So where does this leave the Russian leader?